There we go. I'm not sure if y'all have seen the first discussion that we had that's on the Church St. George's YouTube channel, but tonight is going to be real similar to that first initial discussion that we had a month ago. And my main point is that we're going to begin in the same way that we began that last time, but give me one sec while I pull up some stuff.
Babe, you're gonna kill me with this.
And I'm going to share my screen. Hang on. All right, hang on. There we go. Okay, so can y'all see my notes up here on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yay, I'm going to make them a little bigger than I had them last time because I watched the YouTube video from last time on my iPhone and I couldn't read it. So hopefully this is big enough. But we're going to begin tonight the same way that we began last time. You will remember that one of my hopes is that folks will join us for this discussion group who are not necessarily Christians. And that is why we're not going to begin in prayer. Instead, we're going to begin with a different kind of ritual that's kind of similar. And let's see how y'all do. May the force be with you.
And also with you.
And also with you.
Yay, let us begin. It's great to be with y'all. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started real quick. And that is, man, we had to cancel our in-person gathering for those of y'all who were in Austin at Batch 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. That stunk. I was so looking forward to that. Batch is a wonderful place. It's on Manor, right by Mueller. They have coffee, they have beer, they have good food, they have a great outdoor space, they have a great indoor space. And the week that we were scheduled to meet in person at Batch, it was the tree apocalypse in Austin. And it was a crazy week for me because we did not have power at the church. Eli's school was canceled. I had like painters and renovator people in my house. It was really crazy. I had to go to Houston actually that same day, the Thursday that we were gonna, anyway. Luckily, I drove by Batch that morning, the Thursday morning, to check it out, and it was packed. It was wall to wall, daddies, mommies, kids, people charging their phones, people getting food. Why? Because the neighborhood surrounding that had lost power. And I thought to myself, oh, well, maybe we can meet outside. So I went out to the patio to look. Nope, it was covered in ice and like puddles of water everywhere. So we canceled. Makes me sad, but hopefully in a couple of weeks, we can gather at Batch for an in-person gathering to continue to ruminate on this material in David Bentley Hart's Being, Consciousness, and Bliss. Yeah, so that's one housekeeping item I wanted to talk about. The second one is that this discussion goes from 6 to 7, ideally. And then hopefully at around 7 o'clock, we'll pause and have some discussion. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want y'all to be discussing stuff all the way through. I do. But who can remind me of the two kinds of questions that we talked about last time? I wonder if anyone can remind me of that.
I don't know why it's coming to my mind. Is it foundational questions?
Ooh, that's good. There's clarifying questions.
Clarifying questions.
And exploratory questions, both of which are wonderful, right? But which of those do we want to be saved till the end of the discussion time? Sergio, do you remember?
Exploratory.
That's right, exploratory. So if you have a clarifying question, like I am confused right now, I don't understand what blank means. What does David Bentley Hart, aka DBH, what does he mean by blank? That is a clarifying question, ask it. Or if you're just confused. But if you have a question that wants to like explore the implications of something that we're talking about, that's great too. But I would ask that you hold that off to the end so that we can get through the material as much as possible. What's on tap for tonight is chapter 1, the title of which is God is Not a Proper Name. Last week, we really covered sort of some preliminaries. We did 4 little experiments, which I thought were fun. And we got through the introduction, which is, I think, like the first 10 pages or so. So tonight, we're going to start with chapter 1, God is Not a Proper Name. But you know, I'm glad I cracked open the book, because actually on the pages right before that, at the beginning of each part of the book, not each chapter of the book, but at the beginning of each part of the book, and I believe that there are 3 parts. Let me double check that real quick. Yes, there are 3 parts of the book, and at the beginning of each part, he has a little vignette that has to do, if I'm not mistaken, with dreaming. Dreams feature prominently in this book, and I'll just say here at the get-go that it has something to do with the fact that David Bentley Hart is pulling for a re-enchanted world, David Bentley Hart is distressed about the fact that our modern secular world is disenchanted. And so dreams are relevant there. Like David Bentley Hart thinks that dreams are probably more real than the waking world we see around us. So each of the little vignettes at the beginning of part 1, part 2, part 3 are about dreams, I think. And I'm just going to read the first one beginning on page 11, unless someone else would like to read it. It's very short. Would anyone like to read the paragraph on page 11 and it spills over to the top of page 12?
A man who is asleep and deeply dreaming still usually has some awareness of the real world around him, and often this awareness shapes his dreams. This means, in turn, that while he is asleep, his dream is only form in which he can know and interpret the world that he inhabits. He hears the wind chime, ringing somewhere outside that open window, but in his dream is transformed into a tolling bell in a high tower on the distant hill. A breeze enters the window and passes over him, but to him it's the wind blowing through the valley in which he stands as he gazes upward towards the tower. The wind also causes the leaves in the trees below his window to rustle softly, but to him it is the sound of reeds stirring along the banks of a stream nearby, as a golden snake slips silently through the flowing water. The first pale light of the morning reaches him from the window, but to him it's the last pale light of the evening, before night entirely descends over the valley. He bears his voice. He hears the voice of someone who loves him, trying to rouse him gently from his sleep, because it is time for him to be awake. But he hears it as a mysterious and vaguely menacing voice of a stranger coming from afar, from a place that he cannot see.
Excellent. Yeah, dreams have a connection with the real world. For now, let's think about the real world as the world that we experience. When I say experience, I mean primarily for now, the 5 senses, right? Seeing, hearing, touch. Side note, ancient people and modern people thought that taste and smell reduced down to touch, so that when you're smelling something, you're actually tasting it, and when you're tasting it, that's actually touch. So for now, let's assume that the real world, as opposed to the world of dreams, is the world that we perceive with our senses, seeing, vision, seeing, hearing, etc. Okay, and so what he's saying here is that there's a connection between these two worlds. Any other thoughts about what Spencer just read? And I wonder if anyone can maybe say something about how perhaps it's connected to what we did last time. I don't know. Any thoughts?
My,
Sorry, Andrea, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Not having participated in last week's discussion, I read this prelude to chapter 1 as an outliner. I did not connect it to the introduction, nor did I take. I was able to interpret it to the body of chapter 1.
Cool. No worries at all. Andrea, what were you going to say?
Well, when I read it, I wrote a note, and here's what it says. And I agree with this, even after hearing Spencer read it again. And I wonder if he's trying to make the point that our consciousness is kind of like a dream state through which we can't quite experience the reality of God. Like, we know something's there, we feel it at times, but we can't wake up.
Yeah. Did you say something like we can't not know God?
We
Yeah.
we can't quite experience it. You can't
And
quite grab it.
We can't quite experience it, and we also can't quite not experience it. Like, I mean, if you think about our conversation last time, we talked about how David Bentley Hart would agree with St. Augustine that God is closer to me than I am to myself. It's this idea that God is deep within me. And I actually read a quote today by Saint Clement of Alexandria that said, "He who knows himself, or she who knows herself, knows God." And so, yeah, it's this weird paradoxical thing. Last time we talked about heartbeat and also breathing. By the way, I did that experiment on my 15-year-old, and it was actually kind of cool. God is kind of like our heartbeat. Like, are we aware of our heartbeat all the time? No. But is it always deep down inside of us? Yes. Can we cultivate an awareness of it? Yes. I mean, yoga practitioners talk about how they can regulate their heartbeat. Eastern Orthodox monks on Mount Athos in Greece are able to regulate their heartbeat. So yeah, we can't, God is this strange paradox, according to David Bentley Hart, that it's, as in our disenchanted world, we're going to come back to that notion. It's so many times it seems that God is completely absent. Like, God, what are you talking about? I've never seen God. I've never heard God. You can't put God in a test tube. You can't prove God. What do you mean, God? In our disenchanted world, it seems obvious that God is non-existent. But on the other hand, David Bentley Hart is saying that at a deeper level, when you begin to think about it in certain ways that that undermine the disenchanted nature of our world and our culture, you begin to realize that actually we can't not experience God also, in the same way that I can't not experience my heartbeat, perhaps. So, good. Yeah, I like what you said about dreams, Andrea. Y'all want to dive into chapter 1, God is not a proper name? And so kind of like last time, I'm just going to sort of read through my notes and we're going to talk. And can y'all see my notes, or do I need to make them even bigger?
I can read it.
Awesome. Okay.
I mean, I can't scroll down to the bottom of the page.
That's true. You can't, but I can.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that's me too.
As it becomes pertinent, you'll scroll for us.
Absolutely.
There you go.
All right. So before we dive into chapter 1, actually, I just want to do some quick review. I've got 3 bullet points here. Number 1, who can tell me some things that, according to David Bentley Hart, God is what? God is not. Who can tell me some things, according to David Bentley Hart, that God is not? What is God not, according to David Bentley Hart?
Not a proper name.
Not okay. Yeah,
That's
good.
an easy one. I don't really.
Good. Sergio, thinking about like our discussion last time, what are some things that God is not? Fill in the blank. God is not blank, according to DBH.
I think you said, but I don't know if Bentley Hart said this, but you mentioned several times that it's not especially extended.
Yeah, and I think that he does say that in the book. Yeah. God
Okay.
is not spatially extended in the same way that a highlighter is spatially extended. This highlighter is probably 6 inches long if we were to measure it. And God, whatever God is not that. What are some other things that God is not for David Bentley Hart? By the
God
way,
is not-
just ask you, Andrea, don't forget that. Let me ask you a question. Is Zeus spatially extended? Yes or no? I'm assuming that Zeus exists. Is Zeus spatially extended? Yes or no?
Well,
According
you
to
go back
DBH,
into
yes.
some of the other things. You go back into some of the other things that he was saying is that one of the things is that everybody believes in a higher source, one way or the other. And in that context, then yes, Zeus is spatially extended because he points us to the realm of Almighty.
Okay, let me ask you this. Does Zeus have a finger? Yes or no? Assuming that Zeus is real, does Zeus have a finger?
Yes.
Yes. Is the finger spatially extended?
Yes.
Yes. God is not like that,
Mhm.
according to DBH. What about Thanos? Y'all know who Thanos is? He's got really big biceps and he snaps his fingers and then obliterates half of all living creatures in the universe from the Marvel universe. Is Thanos spatially extended? Yes or no?
Certainly.
Can you measure his bicep?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. God is not like that. So good, Sergio. Now, Andrea, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, God is not a being.
Yeah.
He is being.
That's right. Can you give me some examples of give me some examples of things that are a being?
Like the sun,
Yeah, okay.
right?
Look,
You know,
name
like
something that's behind me.
a bookshelf.
Yeah.
Is that what
I'll
that
name
is?
something
Yeah.
behind you, a wall. Is a wall a thing? Is a wall a being? Yes.
Mhm.
Well,
God
Matt,
is not a-
I'd like to know if a spirit is a being, according to you.
Mm.
So it's funny, Sergio, you always ask questions like that. I've been experiencing them for years and it's wonderful. I would have to say no, just given the fact that for David Bentley Hart, bliss, aka spirit, aka Ananda, let me hear you say Ananda, is God. David Bentley Hart says that spirit, the Holy Spirit, is God. Side note, I almost thought about opening the class like this. In the name of the living God, Sat Chid Ananda. I didn't. I thought about it. I could have, but I want this to be open to atheists also. So, Sergio, my answer would be no, because for David Bentley Hart, spirit, aka the Holy Spirit, is God, and God is not a being.
Clarifying question. So, like, God is not a being, God is being.
Being itself, yes.
God is not a spirit, but God is spirit.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't know. Like, these are some crazy questions, and thanks be to God, we don't have to have all the answers. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. I like that. That sounded more like a clarifying comment, which I
True.
like.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great. So God is not a chair. God is not a man. God is not a woman. God is not a mitochondria. God is not a thing in the world. He is being, or he, she, our language is metaphorical, right? Just because certain people throughout history have referred to God with a masculine pronoun, that does not mean that they think that God has an XY chromosome, right? That's metaphorical language. And maybe we should think about calling God she. Okay, fine. God is not a man or a male. God is not anything in the world. Good. So we cannot say what God is according to David Bentley Hart. We can only say what God is.
Not.
What God is not. That's exactly right. God is not spatially extended. God is not subject to change. God is not materially constituted. We could go on and on. God is not multiple, right? Like God isn't two things. God is not composed of parts and wholes. My watch consists of, or my iPhone consists of parts and wholes, right? WHOLES. It has a battery, it has a case, it has all sorts, a semiconductor, a microchip. God is not like that. God is not a thing. We cannot say what God is. We can only say what God is not. Okay, good. Now, look at the second bullet point, because this is still kind of review, right? And let me repeat something I said last time. I don't really want y'all to care about what I think. I want you to care about what David Bentley Hart thinks, right? This is a book study. I did not write this book. David Bentley Hart wrote this book. My job is to lead a discussion in which we figure out what David Bentley Hart thinks about this stuff. Okay, so let me ask this second bullet point. Is there, according to David Bentley Hart, a definition of being? Now, let me clarify that real quick. So I'll bet you that I could come up with a definition of a triangle. It's a polygon with three sides whose angles add up to 180 degrees. Let's just assume that that's kind of like a philosophically sound definition of a triangle, okay? So is there an exhaustive definition of a triangle? Yes. At least in principle. Is there an exhaustive definition of turtle or giraffe? Yeah, I would say that there is. It might be really long, but that is possible. There is such a thing as a definition of a giraffe or a triangle. What about a chair? Yes. Okay. But is
it possible that there can be anything that's created that is not part of God?
Great question. You're jumping ahead like 8 chapters.
No, actually, I'm on page number. Yeah, I'm at the end of the first chapter, but
cool.
He probably talks more about it later on.
I think that David Bentley Hart would say no. It's not possible that anything exists isn't a part of God. Yeah. Spencer, why did you ask that?
Because he seems to make that from what and by the way, I've only gone through page 45, so awesome. I don't know what follows beyond all this.
Yeah,
but he seems to be making a point that that there is that exactly the point that everything emanates from God, from the creation of God, and what creation actually means was perhaps in the later chapters.
Yeah,
and that the only reason man cannot and by the way, what this is exploring or clarifying Is God sexually nondescript? Because I found it that everything it's all masculine with God in this book. Just
Yes.
as a side
Well,
note.
it's
But-
all masculine with God for 2,000 years of church history.
I understand that, but
I mean, there are exceptions.
I still find it compelling, but
Yeah,
if,
David Bentley Hart.
if in essence everything art, philosophy, everything is because of God. I know that there are this may be minutia, but it comes to my mind that there's some drawings in the caves showing recent hunts, but does not show anything about a higher deity that provided the food for them. Now, granted, these probably drawn by the Neanderthal species, not the Homo sapiens, because the Neanderthals became extinct.
Okay.
What is so that being is no longer a being anymore. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but if he's making God all inclusive, there are a lot of exclusions that come to my mind right now.
David Bentley Hart would say that both the Neanderthals and the bulls that they slaughtered and the walls upon which they carved images or painted images, all of that is, to use your phrase, a part of God.
Not my phrase, David Bentley Hart's phrase.
Okay, yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, he would say that. Because he thinks that God is the source of all being. And again, he's not getting this from the Bible. He's getting it from two things, philosophical metaphysics, but then secondly, this shared tradition of virtually all pre-modern religions. And he names them: Buddhism, certain kinds of Buddhism, Hinduism. He mentions Baha'i, which I don't know, that one seems kind of modern to me, but whatever. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all of them. Zoroastrianism. They all say that God is not a being in the world, but rather God is the source of all being. God is being as such, not this or that being. Not, you can't point to God. You can't say what God is. God is being itself. And that's actually why, if you look at the second bullet point, there is no exhaustive definition of being. So think about my definition of the triangle. A triangle is a polygon with three sides whose angles add up to 180 degrees, right? Is there a verb in that definition? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah. What is the verb?
Add.
What?
Add.
Okay. Yeah. That's a verb in a dependent clause. What's the main verb?
No,
Yeah.
is.
Is. A triangle is. That is being, right? I mean, the infinitive of the verb is to be. So in the definition of the triangle, a triangle is blah, blah, blah. You're assuming the notion of being, right?
Would you
Yeah.
say that one more time for me, please?
Yes. So think about the definition. A triangle is a polygon with three sides, blah, blah, blah. The verb there is the verb is, right?
Yes.
What is the, forgive me, I have to talk about grammar a little bit.
Yeah.
But
To be.
what is the infinitive of the verb is, Tommy?
To be.
That's right. To be, to be. That's being. So the definition of the triangle assumes the notion of being, right? So you can't say being is blah, 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 because you're already assuming being in the definition. The more you think about it, the more you realize that it is not possible to define being. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of like force a stark contrast between being itself on the one hand, whatever that is, and everything else that exists. giraffes, triangles, human beings, etc. There is no definition for being.
And it would be impossible to define being, because to define something, you have to compare it to something other than itself. A triangle is a polygon. Not all polygons are triangles.
Yeah.
What can you compare being to?
That's exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right. Being is not a subclass of some larger class. Yep, that's right. Okay, y'all, look with me at the third bullet point before we dive into this next chapter. Does DBH, and I want you to really pay attention to this. I was thinking about this. This was kind of like an objection that I have to this book. Is DBH saying that you have to master all of this metaphysical stuff before you can experience God?
No.
Do you understand my question? Do you understand that question?
Mhm.
No, no way is he saying that. Rather, he thinks that in our disenchanted world, we have all kinds of assumptions about God that need to be subverted, that need to be undermined. He thinks that we have all kinds of assumptions about God that tend to prevent us from experiencing God in the ways that pre-modern folks did when the world was enchanted. Now, there's a lot there. Does that kind of sort of make sense to y'all? He is not saying that like a simple peasant girl needs to understand all this metaphysics before she can meditate or experience God. Like Bouquet tells me that when she lived in Laos as a 3-year-old, she'd never heard of Christianity or anything like that. Her family was Buddhist. She tells me that she used to dance with God. Does David Bentley Hart disagree with that? No. He's not saying that, oh, no, Bouquet, you couldn't do that because you didn't understand all this metaphysical stuff about God. No, he's not saying that. So why is he making us rehearse all this metaphysical stuff? It's not because that is a prerequisite, for example, to contemplation. No, he's not saying that you have to understand all this stuff and agree with him in order to meditate. No. What he is saying is that we have all these assumptions in our head that are modern and secular. They're not all bad, but they tend, if you see in the highlighted part, they tend to prevent us from experiencing God in the ways that pre-modern people did. Pre-modern people were much more open to the mystical than we are. We tend to live in a world that is two-dimensional. There was a novel written in the early 20th century called Flatland, which is sort of a parody of our modern world, talking about how, in comparison to previous ages, our world is two-dimensional because it's as if we've screened out the mystical. We no longer believe in fairies. We no longer believe in angels. We no longer believe in demons. Maybe we no longer believe in beauty. Maybe we know there's a lot of things that we no longer believe in. And what some people call that, it started with a guy named Max Weber in Germany, is the disenchanted world. And what David Bentley Hart is really saying is that we have to be critical of that. If we can be critical of our disenchanted world and many of our secular assumptions, it can open up a space for us to experience God again. All right. Questions, comments before we dive into chapter 1? I'm afraid to look at my watch, but I'm going to anyway. We're doing all right. Y'all doing all right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to start reading. So David Bentley Hart is claiming in the first couple of pages of chapter 1, beginning on page 13, that when atheist folks talk about denying the existence of God, those atheists are not talking about the same thing as classical theism, as classical theists. Say, for example, Augustine or Aquinas or C.S. Lewis. Those are my 3 stock examples of like Orthodox Christians. He's saying that they're not talking about the same thing. Like, if an atheist said, and we talked about this in the first video, so this is a little bit of review, but like, if I were to walk into a bar and sit down and someone sees me with a collar on and they realize I'm a priest and they're like, I don't believe in God. And I'm like, why? And they're like, because I don't believe in an old man in the sky. That's not what David Bentley Hart's talking about. So David Bentley Hart also denies the existence of an old man in the sky, right? So with respect to the old man in the sky, David Bentley Hart is a what?
Atheist?
He's an atheist. Side note, as we talked about last time, the earliest Christians in the Roman Empire were persecuted for being cannibals and atheists. They were cannibals. And by the way, oh, I don't have the book. Tom Holland's book, Dominion, is masterful at this, in my opinion. But the earliest Christians were persecuted for being cannibals because they ate and drank the body of Christ. That sounds cannibalistic. And they were cannibals. They were accused of being cannibals, but they were also accused of being atheists. Why?
Because they didn't believe in Zeus and Jupiter.
That's right. They didn't believe in the gods of the Roman Empire. So when David Bentley Hart is talking about God being consciousness and bliss, there's lots of kinds of deities that he's not talking about. He's not talking about Zeus. He's not talking about an old man in the sky. He's not talking about, I don't know, a harsh taskmaster. He's not talking about a divine lawgiver. I mean, he's not talking about the God of the gaps. There's a lot of things that he's not talking about. And therefore, it's really difficult even to arrive at a real disagreement between certain kinds of atheists and someone like David Bentley Hart, or even certain kinds of Christians and someone like David Bentley Hart. We're going to keep going because I'm about to get ahead of myself. I don't want to do that. I just want to keep going. On page 15, he says that despite all cultural differences, intrinsic to the human person is the ability to experience. Okay, so now he's not so much talking about this abstract, objective reality that's outside of us. He's talking about the experience of what it means to be human, the experience of being human, right? And he says he's talking about the ability to experience anything at all. The ability to have an experience. Earlier, I specified that when we talk about experience, the first things that we mean is what?
Our senses.
Right. Seeing, hearing, touching. Yeah. And he does mean that here, but I think now he's beginning to broaden the context out to any kind of experience at all, right? An experience of joy, an experience of depression, an experience of hunger. Maybe that's touch. An experience of euphoria, right? An experience of a relationship with another person. To have any experience, he says, that requires certain things. It requires what he calls forms of experience. Okay, now it'd be easy to get bogged down in this, and I don't want to do that, partly because he's going to go deeper into this in chapter or in chapters 4 and 5, consciousness and bliss. This is kind of like a really early preview. So I'm going to keep reading. There's a fundamental human ability to experience. Later, he will argue that God is part and parcel with any experience. Kind of like light is part and parcel with any experience of seeing, right?
Father Matt, I don't know what parcel means.
Woven into, inseparable from. Okay, so light is inseparable from the experience of seeing. even though we can't actually see light. It's a paradox, right? In the same way, what David Bentley Hart is claiming is that God is inseparable from our ability to experience anything. Whether you're talking about seeing something or hearing something or feeling something like an emotion or relating to another person, he's saying that God is part of that. Okay, and we'll come back to this over and over. Okay, then David Bentley Hart mentions reciprocal understanding, or the and so he's talking about interpersonal relationships now. So not just an individual experiencing things like hunger or whatever, but interpersonal experience, two or more people, right? He says, assuming goodwill, it is in principle possible that if two people have an experience, they can talk about it. So like if you go to, you go to a movie with your boyfriend and you can talk about it. Did you like the movie? Here was my favorite part was this, right? You can talk about it. And then he says this, all I want to do in the following pages is to explain how traditional understandings of God illuminate and are illuminated by those experiences. God is woven into our experiences, he's saying. Now, we might not be aware of it, but we might be able to cultivate an awareness of it. And I think that what he's saying is that if we can reflect back on the nature of our experience, it's very reasonable to say, yes, God, we can talk about God as being wrapped up in that. So notice, he's not talking about faith or like the Bible. We believe in God because the Bible says that. No, he's not saying that. He's saying when we reflect back onto the structure of our experience, then we're led to acknowledge the reality of God. All right? Y'all doing all right?
I have no idea what you just said, Father Matt.
And I'm cool with that. Will you keep coming back?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I
All right, let's do two things.
I have a hard time saying now I'm probably getting into exploratory and a point of order has been called on me. I'll shut up.
Okay, cool. I want to do two things. First off, Spencer, think about how you cannot see anything without light. Now, you can't see light. I can see a teacup. I can see a highlighter, but you can't actually see light. That's weird. That's paradoxical. Well, it's the same thing with God, he's saying. So, for example, maybe even to think, like, and this is very much how pre-modern people would talk about it. Like, in order to know that 1 + 2 = 3, there's a kind of intellectual light that is needed for that. And this is weird stuff, Spencer, so don't feel bad, my man.
I don't feel bad. I'm just finding so far the argument unconvincing.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, we're really early on. And no one said you had to like it or agree with it. But I wanted to also say, would anyone else like to say anything to Spencer? I mean, like, because it is weird, right? This whole notion of like God is wrapped up in our experience. What the hell does that mean? Does anyone else have any thoughts about this before we move on?
Well, I think it's what we know already, Spencer, like at church, like God is in everything. And DBH is really smart and he uses a lot of big words and I think he overcomplicates it a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I read it and I'm like, oh my gosh, he just said that 10 pages ago, but now he's saying it in a different way.
Yes.
Like the introduction, I was like, God, I got it. The introduction's amazing. I got it. And then the rest of the book is just kind of explaining it more. You know what I mean? Yeah,
fair enough.
Anyway.
I mean, I think that maybe when we get into like the bliss part, there's some new stuff, and the consciousness part, we'll see. But Andrea, you remember how last time we were talking about, I think we were talking about little children. and how
Mhm.
you and I both sort of agree that when we observe little children, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, like it's easy to interpret, it's easy to look at them and say, wow, they have an experience of God. Like that's sort of direct and intuitive. And then it, like when we get older, it like it's harder, right? Like it's like suddenly things happen when you grow up, especially in our modern secular world,
Where
where
everything has to have an explanation.
yes,
Everything has to have a scientific explanation, a mathematical explanation, a logical explanation.
yeah. And I think that part of like what David Bentley Hart is doing is saying, the experience of the child is actually something that we can sort of begin to talk about in rational terms. Like, there's a sense in which we've lost something that we had as children. The modern world has lost something that it had 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. And that's not just bullshit. Like a 2-year-old experiencing God, or an Aboriginal person 10,000 years ago experiencing God. That's not just BS. Like we can say things about that experience that are rational. There's a whole branch of philosophy that goes into this, but we're not going to get into that. It's called phenomenology. We're not going to get into that. Yeah,
So
I think that thinking
how
about
does
little
the
kids is
concept-
helpful.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
How does the concept of fear figure into this? And when I mean,
I don't know.
Because we're human, right? Like
we're
it's
human,
not.
okay, but what do we fear?
Well, do you know what the most often repeated commandment in Scripture is?
Don't fear?
Yeah.
Oh, I made that up. It really?
Oh, yeah.
No.
So, I mean, yeah, I like Andrea's answer. We're human. I mean, there's a lot of things to be afraid of in this world. And he's going to get into the notion of evil in a moment, but let's keep going. All right. Page 16, DBH says that atheism is incoherent / contradictory. And here we go. This is exactly what I was thinking about a moment ago. But then he qualifies this. He does not mean that it's incoherent to deny a good God based on a deep sensitivity to evil in the world, the kinds of things, Spencer, that make us fear, right? Like, what if Russia wins and beats Ukraine, right? Or, name it. There's so many things that we could be afraid of. And that's because of evil in the world. And so David Bentley Hart is saying, actually, and he wrote a book about this. It's called The Doors of the Sea. It's about the tsunami that happened in, Thailand. 250,000 people died. What year was that? I want to say 2004 or something like that.
Yeah. It was
so,
Christmas. It was Christmas. It was awful.
So he actually thinks that is probably like the only good reason to be an atheist. Based on a deep sensitivity to evil in this world. That is not incoherent, he says. And it's not incoherent to stand aloof from this or that organized religion, he even says, and he sticks up for agnosticism. Rather, he means that if one understands the definition of God propounded by what he calls religious traditionalists, like the Hindus, Thomas Aquinas, etc., if one understands the definition of God in that way, and then that person denies the existence of that is absurd. Because you cannot deny the existence of being. What would that even mean? Like, I believe that being doesn't exist. That notice, yeah. Anyway, look at the first video. We went into that a little bit. Are y'all doing okay?
No.
Ah,
My head's hurting, Father Matt.
okay.
Oh, that means you're understanding it.
No, I'm reading what was the word he used? Circumloquitious prose.
Okay.
Yeah. So God, the creator, is the ultimate arbitrator.
Are you asking me or telling me?
I'm definitely not making statements, Father Matt. I'm not
Why do you
qualified to
ask?
make statements. I have questions only.
Okay, so look, the word arbitrator has not popped up in this book.
That was my word. Sorry.
Yeah, so why are you bringing up the notion of an arbitrator? I mean, it's fine, but like,
Any particular religion's answer to the problem of evil. I see, how do they say? My words here: God, the creator of our church. Oh, I said, God, the creator, or the church is the arbitrator of reason, and not in the realm of human.
okay.
My notes that I wrote on the sidelines of page 16.
All right, cool. All right, cool.
So, but again, it's this outside influence that our inner feelings really aren't inner feelings anymore. They're the product of some other of something outside ourselves telling us how to feel and think. And I think that's where my thought of arbitrator came in.
Okay, cool. I mean, what I think, like, I really like Andrea's point earlier that, yeah, he's using big words. I personally think he kind of has to, like, there's no other way to do this without big words. But it's kind of simple. I mean, God is being. And it is, you can't say that being doesn't exist. Now, maybe you could say, I don't believe God is being. I think that God is an old man in the sky, or I think that God is Zeus. Okay. David Bentley Hart doesn't believe that God exists. And that is not what all of these religions have said for thousands of years. They have said that God is being, the ground of all being, the source of all being, existence itself. So really, what this book is doing is meditating on that over and over and over again, lots of different ways, so that by the end of it, we can engage in a contemplative practice in light of these truths.
So the earlier gods with a little g were just transitory thoughts that waited for us to become aware enough that there is a God with a big G?
Maybe. What David Bentley Hart says is that there's lots of gods, angels, demons, fairies. He believes in fairies.
Yeah, he lost me on that one, but I'll wait till we get there. It's
just that those are not being. So they're creatures. They might be supernatural creatures that exist in some other dimension that seems weird to us, but they're not being itself. They're not God. So yeah, he likes other gods. He likes Zeus. I mean, Zeus is kind of immoral. He rapes women. That sucks. Zeus, there's you can criticize Zeus. You can probably criticize the God, David Bentley Hart's God as well. But the point is, all of the gods with a small g are not being itself. And this is all over the Bible. I mean, like, even Jesus looked at his disciples and quoted a psalm and said, "You are gods, you will be gods." He's not denying the existence of gods. He's just saying none of them, whether you're talking about Zeus, angels, demons, fairies, whatever, goblins, none of them are being itself. Yeah. And at the end of the last paragraph of section 1, he actually defends a certain kind of atheism. It's probably related to the notion of evil again. Yeah. Y'all, on page 19, again at the end of section 1, he says something that I think is worth thinking about. He says, look, because David Bentley Hart does like a certain kind of atheist, and to be honest, it's an atheist like Nietzsche. But the kind of but the
Figures they
reason
write a lot alike.
sorry.
I said it figures they write a lot alike.
Yes. Yeah, he would take that as a compliment. Not really, he wouldn't. But look, what David Bentley Hart likes about Nietzsche is that he doesn't believe in reason. He's literally a nihilist and an absurdist. And David Bentley Hart says, good. Because what he says is, you can't believe in reason and not believe in this God, the God that is being. You can believe in both of them or neither of them, but not one and not the other, according to him. Yeah. So he would say that there's a good kind of atheist. It's the kind that believes that everything is absurd. Which is why one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite theologians is that Christianity is a hair's breadth from nihilism. Yeah, that's section 1. Can we keep going? How y'all doing? Oh, it's 7 o'clock.
This is the part, what you just said really confused me, and I marked it in my book, like the question mark, the whole, like, you can't believe in reason and not God. You can't believe in God and not reason.
Yes, yeah. And it's important to understand, Andrea, I think it's helpful in this book, anytime you're confused and you see the word God, just substitute the word being. You can't believe in reason and not believe in being. Now, you can say, in other words, if you say being is not real, you have to say, screw everything, nothing matters. There's no such thing as meaning. Okay. Suicide is totally a cool option, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no order in the world. There's no reason. There's no structure. There's no beauty. Everything is a blooming, buzzing confusion.
Here's something DBH says on page 19. If there is no God, which we can substitute the word being there, if there is no being, then of course the universe is ultimately absurd. Yeah. In a very precise sense that it is irreducible to any more comprehensive equation. It's glorious, terrible, beautiful, horrifying, but in the end, it's also quite meaningless.
Yeah, that's right. Now, obviously, not everyone agrees with him, right? I mean, one of the most famous atheists alive is a man named Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins would not agree with this. But Richard Dawkins, if you gave him truth serum and said, talk to me about the God that you reject, guess what? The God that he rejects is not being. It's not. It's some super strong entity. So, you know, like David Bentley Hart is also an atheist with respect to Richard Dawkins' God. We're not talking about that God. We're talking about being. I feel like I interrupted someone. Oh, Sergio, I think you were going to say something.
No, I don't even know why I pressed it, man. It's like I was pressing it as I was thinking.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I muted myself as I was thinking. When you say being, one of the last thoughts I had is that you're making a mistake by putting it up there. I think you should put it under.
Okay. Great. Every time like this, you can do your thing.
Well, why not both? I mean, source and end.
It is both. Yeah, it is both. I think that, yeah, it's the reason I think I like to think about being as transcendent because it's not this thing. It's not this thing. It's bigger than those things, but it's not bigger. It's in these things, right? Like, yes. Andrea, did you like what Tommy said?
What did Tommy say?
He read a passage.
Oh yeah, no, I got that. I got that. And I underlined that when I read it.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. I guess it was the reason part. No,
Yeah.
and I see this in a lot of people, just not to notice or not let it bother you. Like I'm not going to think about that. That's too hard. That's too deep.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I'm afraid I don't know. I can't keep the passage in my head, the one that was just read. Is it long? Because if it's long, then you don't have to read it again.
Do you have the book, Sergio?
I have no time to read that book right now, unfortunately.
No problem. Tommy, will you read it again?
Sure. If there is no God, aka if there is no being, then of course the universe is ultimately absurd, in the very precise sense that it is irreducible to any more comprehensive equation. It is glorious, terrible, beautiful, horrifying, all of that, but in the end it is also quite meaningless.
Read the next sentence, the next two sentences.
Oh, the secret of a happy life then is either not to notice or not to let it bother one overly much. A few blithe spirits even know how to rejoice at the thought.
Yeah. What's
So
the
a few happy people or a few happy spirits are able to be happy about the idea that everything is absurd and meaningless.
Yeah.
If there is no being.
Yeah. What's the Hemingway book? There's a Hemingway book that I read a long time ago in which what the character, like, I think he commits suicide. I can't remember, but like he comes to the conclusion that everything is meaningless and he's happy, and then he kills himself. Like that's the kind of thing that David Bentley Hart is saying is a legitimate option.
Kill yourself?
Sorry?
To kill yourself?
If you think that all is meaningless, yeah.
Legitimately
Well, there
reasonable.
could be no meaning. So what you're saying is, if you don't attribute everything to God, then the solution is to kill yourself.
No, he's not saying that.
No, the question though. That seemed to be the implication there, though.
He's saying that there's no reason not to, if you think that everything is actually meaningless, because there is no being.
Can you not flip that phrase and say, if everything is already has a meaning, has already been preordained, then why live the life anyway?
Well, here again, does the word preordained pop up in the book? Like, there's a lot of things.
I was thinking outside the box here.
I mean, I would just say let's talk about preordination and predestination later. I mean, like for now, I want to stick with whatever he's talking about in this book.
All right. Well, I was thinking in the infinite when all there is finite around me.
Well, yeah. The finite is very real, but it's not God. It's a part of God, but God is being itself, according to David Bentley Hart and Thomas Aquinas and C.S. Lewis and the Buddha and name some other super pre-modern thinker. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to come up with any right now. The ancient yogis in Hinduism. Yeah, everything around us is finite, but none of that is God. It's a part of God, but none of that is being itself. And let me tell you why it matters. And maybe we could kind of, I don't know, maybe close with this or begin to land the plane with this. Like, What David Bentley Hart would say is, think about the phrase, the mystic attaches to being, right? See, David Bentley Hart wants to say the reason this matters is because contemplation is real. Like, human beings are divine and we have a connection to God such that we can experience God as we experience ourselves. Okay? But in order for that to be true, like, God has to be deep inside of me. God has to be closer to me than I am to myself. Is the cup closer to me than I am to myself? What about the highlighter? What about the oak tree? What about my wife? No. The wife is a little different because she's a person. By the way, God is a person. So maybe, I mean, I think that another human being can come closer to being deep inside of you than a cup can. See, this is why it matters. Yes, everything around us is finite. None of that is God. None of that is the source of our being, the source of our consciousness, the source of our bliss. Now, sometimes I get confused and I think that beer is the source of my bliss. That doesn't go well. That doesn't go well. Only when I realize that God is the source of my bliss do things go well. So that's why it matters. It's about experiencing God. What he's doing is he's explaining for modern people how it's possible that we can experience God. That's what he's doing in this book.
We spoke a little bit earlier about how little children just seem to experience God very freely and very easily. And then as we grow up, we complicate things. And I think the same thing has happened for the modern world. We've complicated things, but it's like we took a few steps forward and then just stopped. If we keep on complicating things, we'll start to understand how simple things really are.
Yeah, man. One of my favorite phrases is the simplicity on the far side of complexity. Last time we talked about Plato's line, and Plato's line is a version of the simplicity on the far side of complexity. Yeah, I love that. One of my favorite, go ahead.
You mean me?
I thought I cut someone off.
No,
Sorry.
finish your idea.
So one of my favorite philosophers, a guy named Paul Ricoeur, who was a French Catholic, he says this: after the desert of criticism, we long to believe again. After the desert of criticism, we long to believe again. Now, that doesn't mean that we turn our brains off. Like, you can never go back, right? Like, I cannot go back and experience life as a 3-year-old, right? The human race cannot go back and pretend like we didn't discover the internet or didn't invent the internet, or that we didn't develop a notion of human rights, or that we didn't learn the methods of modern science, or that we didn't discover evolution or things about psychology. We can't go back. No one is saying we should try to go back and stick our heads in the sand like ostriches. No, but it is about a simplicity on the far side of complexity. So, yeah, what do you think about all that, Tommy? I love what you said.
I think that, yeah, I love that phrase, simplicity beyond complexity.
Yeah, because you can never go back.
You can never go back. And would you want to, if you could? I don't think so. I don't think so. There shouldn't want to anyway. Yeah, sure. That, I mean, yeah. I guess there are those that want to be infantilized, but that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's funny, you know, I'm an Episcopal priest, which means that I get to hang out with, you know, elderly folks. And, you know, my dad is, you know, an octogenarian, God bless him. And it's interesting how sometimes when we get older, we become like little children again. And I think that it's, you know, I don't want to mischaracterize things, but sometimes there's something in that that's beautiful. I hope that makes some sense.
I'm sorry.
Didn't you say
Big-
last
big-
time wisdom is the far side of experience, something like that?
I probably did. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was probably in the context of Plato's line.
Yeah.
Wisdom is very different from like discursive complexity. Wisdom is very different from like intellectual complexity or
Yes. Yes.
informational complexity. It's not that. It's on the
Right.
side of that.
Mhm.
Okay, when you say on the far side, you mean like at the end or the opposite side, or
So what I'm doing is I'm thinking about a pilgrimage or a journey or a process
yeah,
that maybe you might think of it as having a beginning, a middle, and an end.
yeah,
And what I'm saying is, like, think about like the analogy of a 2-year-old. Like the 2-year-old starts out, the word naivete comes to mind. The 2-year-old is naive, but then life happens. They learn things. Maybe some of the things that they learn are very disturbing, right? Maybe they undergo horrific experiences, but a lot of what they learn is good. They learn to read. They learn, that they learn all sorts of stuff. They learn that calculus is really hard. They learn that economic theory is complicated. They learn so many things and they experience things, and that's complexity, right? So you start out at a naive place, you pass through a phase of complexity, but then I think that what we're all saying, what Tommy's saying, the Paul Ricoeur quote is saying that there's a return to that previous state, but it's not actually a going back, it's a going up. It's not a circle, it's a spiral. So that there's a second naivete that is not that doesn't deny the complexity of reality.
Or maybe there's a second innocence that's not naive.
That's it. And
Yeah, I just
reminded me of
I
William
just put it
Blake.
in the chat. There's a quote on page 10 of the introduction at the top, and that's wisdom is the recovery of innocence. I put it in the chat.
That's it.
I love that.
Yeah. Jesus says that unless you have the faith of a child, you cannot enter my kingdom. He doesn't mean he wants us to be anti-intellectual or he wants us to become fundamentalists or to turn our brains off. No. But he does mean that it's possible to return to experience that same reality as a child does because it's real. It's real. And the fact that growing up involves a lot of complexity actually doesn't make it unreal at the end of the day. It makes us mature.
what doesn't make it unreal but mature? What is
Complexity. Yep. Complexity, experience, disappointment, the good, the bad, the ugly, learning, knowledge, information. All of that at first makes us forget how to be little children. We forget how to enjoy the reality of, I'm just going to say the reality of God, because that's what David Bentley Hart is saying. But it's possible to move through that complexity and regain that innocence. That's a great quote, Andrea. Thanks for putting it up.
I don't like neither innocence nor naivete, but
Pick a new
it's
word.
like
Then.
it's like peacefulness. It's not really
Mm.
because it's not innocent. I don't see it as innocent. I see it as very different, but of course it's similar, but it's only similar in feeling, not in in reason.
How do you feel about the word simple? Simplicity.
Yeah, that's that. I think that's a better. But that's not. I mean, I don't want to make it about me. When you said bliss, Father Matt, you said y- the reason you feel joy or bliss can be a person or it can be God. Did you say
Well,
that before?
well, when I was talking about persons, I was saying that because I was saying that the cup I cannot experience the cup in contemplation or meditation. The cup cannot be the source of my bliss. Yes, that's what I said. And then I was like, an oak tree can't be the source of my bliss, and pizza can't be. And then I said, and my wife can't be the source of my bliss. But then I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. She actually comes a little bit closer than all those other things. My wife can be deep down inside of me in a way that other things never can, because she's a person. She can be in my heart. St. Paul writes to the Philippians and he says, I have you in my heart, right? So I was trying to say there, Sergio, is that people can be deep down inside of us in a way that objects can't. And I think that that's because they're people. And then I said, oh, by the way, God is a person. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of it's about intimacy. That's one of the things David Bentley Hart is saying in this book over and over again. God is intimate in an interior way to our souls. But the only reason that's possible is because God is being itself. A cup cannot be intimate. Okay, I just thought of something. My youngest child has always been, each kid is different, right? And my youngest child has always been a little bit I don't know, oppositional, always throwing me curveballs, right? All the time. And I remember when I used to tuck him in when he was like 18 months old or 2 years old, and I would say, Ellie, do you feel close to me? And she would say, of course I do, Daddy. You're like right by me. Like she didn't understand that I meant, can you feel me in your heart? Right? It's as if she was relating to me, he was relating to me as an object. Objects cannot be deep down in our hearts, but people can. And even more than people, God can. But that is only because God is not XYZ. God is not spatially extended. God is not composite. God is not a thing in the world, right? If God were a thing in the world, God could not be intimate deep down inside of me. And for thousands of years, mystics have been experiencing God like that. That's actually an empirical fact.
What my mind thinks about is, well, is it really the person that is inside of your heart, or is it God and you just get it through the person?
Oh, I love that.
Hmm.
I mean, and again, Spencer earlier was talking about how David Bentley Hart says that everything is a part of God. And so maybe we could say something like, yes, the highlighter is part of God, but not nearly as much as a human being is part of God, right? So maybe that, I think that connects with what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an exploratory question I was saving from the beginning, maybe.
We're definitely in exploratory question time because we've got about 8 minutes left.
And so the thought is that it seems like since God is the source, let's say my dad is my source, right? Or let's say my parents are my source. So are my parents a part of me, or am I a part of my parents? And well, that actually it seems like both, right? So if it's I just want us to be aware that the claim God is part of things makes sense too.
Amen.
Not only things are part of God.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, yeah. How about, I think that, I think that David Bentley Hart, yes, might have a small quibble, and he might want to say, hey, why don't we say that God is in things instead of a part of things? Because remember, God is a part. Do you realize that you just said that God is finite?
Mhm.
Okay. I kind of did, yes. Kind of,
So
but
but I think your instincts are great. And I just think that DBH would say, how about saying that God is in everything? And actually, this is what the church fathers did say. Everything is in God, and God is in everything. And yeah, and we call that the immanence of God. Immanence. God is immanent to this world, absolutely. But notice, is Zeus immanent to this world? No, he's just a finite creature in the world. You cannot say that all of reality is shot through with the presence of Zeus. But you can say that all of reality is shot through with the presence of being, aka God. It's a great question. Y'all, how you doing? I wonder, I don't really see who all's on the screen. But I wonder if there's anyone who hasn't spoken who might want to have something on their heart and mind. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. I don't know what we'll do next time. I don't know if we'll jump to chapter 2. Probably what we'll do is we'll take like 10 minutes and I'll try to summarize sections 2 and 3 and 4 of chapter 1, and then we'll jump into chapter 2. Side note, I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a typo in this book. There's 5 sections, but the sections are 1, 2, 3, 5. There is no section 4. Did anyone notice that? It's very strange.
Oh,
So anyway, probably what we'll do.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I don't see, okay, I see chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I see part 1, 2, 3.
Yes, but I'm looking within chapter 1. There's little sections. Yeah, there's section 1 on page 13. There's section 2 on page 19. There's section 3 on page 28. There's no section 4. But there is section 5 beginning on page 42. Yeah.
How do you know, like, has Bentley Hart tell you that is has he told you it's a typo? I'm just making a joke here, but how do you know it's a typo?
He has not. But at the last clergy conference, I, together with my good friend Neil McGowan, who's a priest in Houston, had a 2-hour dinner with David Bentley Hart. And check out how cool my bishop is, Andy Doyle. Oh my gosh. He had a book signing party, and there were like 5 authors there autographing their books. And Andy invited me to be in that book signing right next to David Bentley Hart. It was so cool.
Wow.
No, he did not tell me that there was a typo in the book. He's probably never read the book. Y'all, what else? What else in this chapter? Being, consciousness, and bliss. let's look at the title of chapter 2. Okay, you know what? Actually, instead of that, let me close with this. God is not a proper name. Do y'all know what I think you could also say God is not a proper noun. I think it's the same thing.
Mhm.
Is Zeus a proper noun?
Yes.
What about Thanos?
Yes.
What about Isis?
Yes.
See, the word God is not like that. It's the Greek word theos, Theos, which is cognate, by the way, with Zeus, 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 and in Latin it's Deus, Deus, but it's not a proper noun. It's the same word used to talk about angels or like other kinds of deities. So that's kind of weird. Now, also think about the Old Testament. The paradigmatic name for God is what? Yahweh. Or if you're Jewish, you're not supposed to say that. So you could say the Tetragrammaton. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? YHWH, which in English Bibles is usually capitalized, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That's not a coherent word. It's gibberish. It's literally it's gibberish because we're talking about being and we don't know what being is. Being is beyond our comprehension. Being is mysterious. That's what he's saying. When he says God is not a proper noun, what he's saying is that we cannot understand God. We cannot understand whatever this thing is we're talking about. God is incomprehensible. God is beyond our capacity to think. Yeah, and it makes sense with everything else he's saying. There's a paradox here. God is not like any other object in the world, like a triangle or a zebra or a giraffe or a fairy if they exist, or a unicorn if they exist. God is not like that. When we talk about God, we actually don't know what we're talking about. Now we know what we're not talking about. We do know what we're not talking about, but we actually don't know what we are talking about. And there is a huge paradox there, but it's a wonderful paradox because if it were any other way, God would just be like a creature in the world, and that is not God.
Yeah, they'll make it boring, man.
Yeah. God is a mystery that in which we live and move and have our being, but we cannot comprehend God. Now we can worship God. It's really weird. Y'all, I've got 7:31. Any final thoughts before we close? It's been great hanging out with you. I hope that, this was more good than bad tonight. Thoughts, questions, parting thoughts, going once, going twice. May the force be with you.
And also with you.
And also with you.
See you next
Good night,
time.
y'all.
Peace out.
Peace out.